My, what a weekend we have had. It's now a done deal. Benjamin Netanyahu is out after 12 years as Israel's prime minister. So who's in power now? And what can this new coalition do for us? And why is Netanyahu vowing to return to power? Chris Mitchell has more.
Today, the new government posed for the traditional picture with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin. On Sunday night, by the slimmest of margins, 60 to 59, the Knesset approved the new coalition government. During his speech, incoming Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was heckled constantly by members of the opposition. But Bennett, who was once Netanyahu's ally and now rival, recognized his former boss.
Thank you, Benjamin Netanyahu, for many years of service and lots of achievements for Israel. As Prime Minister, you worked for many years with devotion and to our political and defensive power.
Netanyahu now serves as leader of the opposition and cited how his governments have transformed Israel.
And if it is destined for us to be in the opposition, we will do it with our backs straight until we topple this dangerous government and return to lead the country in our way.
Netanyahu questioned if Bennett would be willing to disagree with U.S. President Biden and vowed he would be back. Bennett now leads a checkerboard coalition of 8 parties, representing left, center, right, and for the first time, an Arab Islamist party.
Well, it's true that this government has a very difficult path ahead of it, a narrow parliamentary majority, a very heterogeneous government, and in this respect, it will be challenging to keep it together.
Right after the vote, the new government held its first cabinet meeting. It faces daunting challenges at home and threats outside its borders. Still, earlier this year, Bennett told CBN News he was up to the job.
I'm ready to take that responsibility as former defense minister, former entrepreneur and CEO of companies. I think I've got what's necessary to pull Israel out of this hole and sort of go to the next phase of Israel as the startup nation.
While President Joe Biden congratulated Bennett, differences between the two allies on the Iranian nuclear deal may test the new government.
The renewal of the nuclear agreement with Iran is a mistake that will give legitimacy again to one of the darkest and most violent regimes in the world. Israel will not let Iran arm itself with a nuclear weapon. Israel is not part of the deal and will continue to maintain full freedom of action.
After 4 elections and more than 2 years of political paralysis, it remains to be seen if this new government will provide the stability many Israelis are hoping for.
Well, Chris joins us now from Jerusalem. Chris, you've interviewed Israel's new prime minister. Tell us more about him.
Well, Pat, we learned when we interviewed him just a couple of months ago before the last election, he's a religious man. He's probably the first Israeli leader, I think, in modern history that wears a kippah. So, and some people say he's the first religious leader since temple times. He served in an elite special forces unit. He fought in the 2006 Second Lebanon War, the one we were up on the northern border, Pat. He's made millions as an entrepreneur. And in his speech, he wants to bring Israelis together. He wants to promote Aliyah. He says he wants to have a new page with Israeli Arabs, and certainly that's part of the coalition they have for the first time an Israeli Arab party. But he faces such a tough challenge, Pat. I mean, to be leading Israel and keeping this coalition together, parties from the left, center, right, and the Arab Party. They've succeeded in ousting Netanyahu. That was the ideological glue holding them all together. But the question is, can they agree on how to govern together? They'll be tested right away.
This man, Lapid, he is second in command. He's going to be Minister of Foreign Affairs. Tell us about him.
Well, Lapid is a sort of a center-left politician here. He's a former journalist, and really his father was actually part of a Shinui, which is a political party years ago that was really anti-religious, anti-ultra-Orthodox. I think he's really sort of the power behind Bennett right now. He was the one that was able to put this coalition together, and so he's really going to be prime minister in 2 years if this government can last. But they're facing huge geopolitical issues, Pat. Yeah, they're facing Iran. Bennett addressed that in his speech, as we had in our report. And they're unified on Iran not getting the nuclear weapon. But the question is, and that's the question that Netanyahu raised, can they stand up to the Biden administration? That's going to be a divisive issue about Iran and the Palestinian Authority. And so I was talking to a former leading Israeli diplomat earlier today, Pat. He said that Israel may need to be firmer with their superpower ally, and we'll see how they're able to do that.
Chris, the last question, what about this Palestinian state? I'm sure that Naftali Bennett doesn't want such a thing. What is the posture of this new government?
Well, that's one thing that divides some of the government. Bennett certainly doesn't want a two-state solution. There are other members of his party, like the far left or the Meretz party. They do want a two-state solution. So that's one key issue. What's going to happen when this government has to make a decision? For example, in the budget, Pat, they have certainly allocating funds for roads in Judea and Samaria. Will that be part of the budget? That's one of the questions. And I just wanted to add, Pat, you know, last week I was at the Knesset. It was part of the Jerusalem prayer breakfast. It was hosted actually by a member in Bennett's party. His name is Matan Kahana. And so what I was actually asked to speak. So I read from your Herzliya speech in 2004, and in that speech in 1974, you had interviewed Yitzhak Rabin, and that's where he pledged. He asked that the United States would be strong, and that's when you pledged that night on the Mount of Olives that you would stand with Israel no matter what. And they felt alone then. They feel alone now. And that's why your support for Israel is so critical at this time, and also for people to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Chris, great story. Thank you so much. Well, in other news, President Biden is meeting with economic and military allies in Europe. So how will he handle Russia's President Putin? And is Biden coming from a place of weakness? Ephraim Graham has more.
Pat, President Biden gathering with NATO leaders in Brussels today, where challenges from Russia and China are taking center stage. The alliance expected to label China a security risk due to its cyber attacks and naval expansion. This all comes after the weekend G7 summit in England, where leaders from the world's strongest economies condemned China's human rights abuses. The NATO nations will reaffirm its central tenet: an attack on one member is an attack on all, and consider expanding that to include cyber attacks. That's a major topic in the upcoming summit between Biden and Russia's President Vladimir Putin, after attacks by Russia-based cyber gangs targeted America's fuel and meat supplies. Both leaders agree U.S. and Russia relations are at historic lows. Recently, Putin responded to a question about President Biden, referring to him as a killer.
When President Biden was asked whether he believes you are a killer, he said, "I do." Mr. President, are you a killer?
Over my tenure, I've gotten used to attacks from all kinds of angles and from all kinds of areas under all kinds of pretext and reasons, and of different caliber and fierceness, and none of it surprises me.
President Biden and Putin meet in Geneva on Wednesday. As President Biden heads into that crucial summit, critics of the administration say its policies are projecting a perception of weakness to America's enemies. Dale Hurd has more.
At the G7, Joe Biden announced America is back as a world leader. But some believe his administration's policies are making the world more dangerous. Biden entered the White House set to ride a post-COVID economic boom and correct what Democrats considered Donald Trump's reckless foreign policy. But after a series of setbacks at home and abroad, Biden has been dubbed the master of disaster, who is taking America back to the dark days of Jimmy Carter. High gasoline prices and inflation have returned at home, but critics say far more problematic is the perception among our enemies abroad that America is weak again. As Joe Biden makes good on his promise to roll back Donald Trump's foreign policy, it certainly doesn't feel as if it has made America or the world safer. North Korea greeted the new administration in March by firing missiles into the Sea of Japan. The White House response was basically, don't do that again. That same month, China mocked and humiliated the U.S. delegation at a summit held on U.S. soil. The White House has decided to reopen talks with Tehran over the Iran nuclear deal and even lifted some economic sanctions, which some experts say will increase the chances of a future war between Iran and Israel. And it resumed hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. aid to the Palestinians, 1 month before Hamas fired rockets into Israel.
And every one of those rockets might as well have Joe Biden's name written on the side of it, because it is his weakness, his appeasement, his moral relativism and ambiguity, his lack of backbone to stand up and stand with Israel that is causing this war in the Middle East.
Frank Gaffney was an Undersecretary of Defense in the Reagan administration, which had to rebuild America's foreign policy after the disastrous Jimmy Carter era.
I would describe Joe Biden's foreign policy as basically Barack Obama's on steroids. I mean, think about this. A little over 100 days ago, Israel was in a totally different position than it is now. And that's 100% because of the Biden foreign policy mistakes.
The White House has also decided to cancel America's Keystone Pipeline and 10,000 jobs, while allowing the completion of Russia's Nord Stream pipeline to Western Europe, something former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Sunday the Trump administration would have never allowed.
We made clear that that pipeline was not going to be completed. It would not have been completed had we had 4 more years. I'm very, very confident of that.
Old hands like Gaffney say they've seen these kinds of policies in action before, and it doesn't end well. A troubling prediction as Biden heads into his first meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Back here at home, more than 50 million Americans in the western U.S. are facing oppressive heat in the coming days. The National Weather Service to issue excessive heat watches and warnings throughout California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. Temperatures soaring to more than 100 degrees in most areas and predicted to top out at, get this, 118 degrees in Phoenix. That's scheduled to happen on Thursday. Ouch. Pat?
Well, you know, those who look for global warming, they're finally getting an answer to their prayers. We're getting it, and it's getting it in spades. It is going to be powerfully hot. And all we can say right now is stay indoors, stay cool, stay hydrated, and don't be a hero. I remember jogging when I was in my jogging phase out in Phoenix when the temperature was about 107. And it wasn't long before I was facing heat stroke and didn't even know I'd gotten it. So please be careful.